All right, welcome everyone to the Wizard of Radical Self-Respect. Today is going to be interview number 6 of the Interview with a Survivor series. Today, my guest is Dr. Gretchen Seitz. She is a doctor of acupuncture, and she has an interesting story that it's going to be from a different perspective because it's going to be from a woman's perspective of a female narcissist of the covert variety. So I'm pretty excited to get her story out there and give her the ability to share like her experiences with everybody else, because I do think that is one of the most important things. Hearing other people's stories, I think it helps develop the community, and I think a lot of people will identify when someone can just share honestly and openly what their story is. So that was the reason why I started this series. But before I get into the rest of that, though, please subscribe if you haven't already, and remember to like the video too if you liked it when the video is over, and share this video with others that you think might benefit. But Dr. Seitz, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Hi, Jared. I'm doing pretty well today. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. So it's
Yeah.
a pleasure to have you here.
Thank
And
you.
you were in a long-term relationship with a female covert narcissist. So perhaps we should go to the beginning of that.
Yeah.
How was the beginning of that situation for you?
That was one of the most intense times of my life. Like a lot of people, I think, who end up experiencing narcissistic abuse, I was at the tail end of a marriage. And I had been married, well, together with my ex-husband at the time, who I have two daughters. We had been together for 18 years, and that relationship was probably never going to work because I was in a marriage with the wrong gendered person for me. So that was something that I was coming to terms with, and I ended up in a relationship very, very quickly, which was part of the reason why my marriage dissolved also. And I was completely enamored with a woman, and I had not been in a relationship with a woman before. So it was kind of a perfect storm.
I could see that being a thing too, where if you've never had a relationship with a woman before, it's all new.
Oh,
It was
yes.
all new in that regard.
Yes. And it was very validating, in a way, because, like a lot of people, again, who experience narcissistic abuse or emotional abuse, we have had a lifetime of being responsible for other people's feelings and sort of feeling like, well, if I change myself, things will get better. Or, well, it's probably my fault that this isn't working out. So it was always my fault that my marriage, something was just wrong with it. And so, when I went to a therapist with my ex-husband, the therapist's advice was that I should just have more sex. That was that was the best that he could come up with. So that was the last day.
That was a male therapist.
That guy. Yeah. I was like, that's not it, dude. I've been trying this for 18 years and that strategy hasn't helped. So, talk about being gaslighted by everybody, So
he must have been an old school therapist to say something like that.
Or something. I don't know. He clearly, he never asked me anything about, it didn't even occur to me, but it would have been such a gift if he had, some awareness and he had, I don't know, just given me the permission to ask myself some questions.
Sure. It sounds like he had a specific goal in mind. Yeah. He was like, I want this relationship to work. And that's the goal that I want for this couple to have. And this is what I think she needs to do to make the relationship work.
Yeah. The logic would seem pretty, sound, like just have more sex and your marriage will be better. But it doesn't always work that way. So
it's like that old Trump meme, sounds good, doesn't work.
Yeah, right. Sure. It sounded good. And even I believed like, okay, yeah, that if I just do this, everything will get better. And I tried it and so when I met her, and I just could not explain why I was the way I felt about her. I mean, it was like, something that I had never experienced before. And I wasn't sure why I couldn't stop thinking about her, why I, wanted to be around her. And um, so it was very validating in that regard.
Sure.
And so it of course, like everybody says not to do, right? Wait a period of time before you become really intimate. Well, that didn't happen. It was kind of like be
Yeah.
intimate right away and then
Right.
figure it out. So nothing was happening in a way that was going to create anything that was healthy or sustainable. But it lasted for 6 years, and it became problematic very early in the relationship when I look back on it, and having been, in therapy. I've been doing cognitive behavioral therapy pretty much once a week, or every 1 or 2 weeks, every 1 or 2 weeks, as long as I can get an appointment, for the last 14 months, 15 months. So it's just over a year in my healing process. So I'm still learning a lot. I feel, uncovering a lot, but much more makes sense. And to have somebody kind of guide me through, because I didn't know what any of this was. And I didn't know what it was until I went to a therapist who said, this isn't all your fault. And she just started to, ask me some really big questions, like, do you know what narcissistic abuse is? Have you heard of gaslighting? Do you know what emotional abuse is? Have you heard of personality disorders? And then, helped me walk through some of why I didn't see red flags. I
Well,
think that's yeah.
to rewind a little bit. So
Mhm.
besides the rush to physical intimacy, were there any
Yeah.
other kind of love bombing that you
Oh
look
my
back now
god.
and see?
Yes, that was part of what was great about it, right? I mean, it's what gets us hooked was so much attention, and so, just I didn't realize that, getting access, having access, being keyed in, texting all the time, wanting to be, together all the time. Let's go to this wonderful restaurant. I'm going to take you to this wonderful place. I'm going to take you, we're going to have a trip here and there. And it was very seductive. The whole thing was completely seductive. And that's very difficult to have objectivity about. You're just
Mm.
like, "Oh my gosh, this is what I've always wanted. This is the," and there's a lot of that. You're my soulmate.
Oh,
There are all these signs that we're meant
sure.
to be together, and I keep seeing this number pop up on my phone, and that means that we're, you know,
That's
meant
a
to be
tactic
together. And oh God, it
right out of the
worked.
art of seduction tactic, really,
It
where they'll say use spiritual lures.
it
It
worked on
sounds like that's
me.
what she did.
It worked on me. And so to be fair, I didn't see it. Like alarm bells were not going off. And so, therapy has also been really significant in helping me identify why those were not red flags. And so that's the part that I, need to take
Sure.
responsibility for. And that's part of, my healing and understanding generational trauma, and, protecting my children, making sure that this doesn't continue.
Right. And
Yeah.
she was more of like a take charge kind of woman? Like she was kind of leading the whole thing?
She is. I mean, not to, I don't want to sound like I'm forcing blame on anybody, because, it takes two, but uh, yes, she was very persuasive, very big energy, but that was
Okay.
incredibly attractive to
Okay.
me. It was like, oh my gosh, this will be, someone's just going to tell me what to do. Someone's just going to tell me how it's supposed to be. That felt easier than put your big girl pants on, Gretchen, and figure it out yourself. That seemed much scarier than this person is going to just tell you how to be. This person
kind of
going to tell
swept
you who you are. Oh, yeah. Now you can, identify with this person. You don't have a marriage and a family anymore. That's completely dissolving. So I went through the divorce, and that was painful, extremely painful. And at the same time, I was trying to make this new relationship work with someone who just became increasingly more difficult and controlling. And I just kept trying to accommodate. And it was a lot of small things that I just explained away quite a bit
That's a big one to know.
I heard the story about her experiences of childhood abandonment and abuse and things like that. So that was very compelling to me. I was like, oh wow. I mean, it like perfectly spoke to my wanting to take care of her. And no one's ever going to do this to you again. I'm going to be the one who's not going to let this happen. Not on my watch. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to love you. That's, totally wrong how people treated you. And you found a safe haven in me. And that felt like wonderful. That made me feel so good. It was filling a void that I had.
Sure.
So that was none of that was awareness at the time, right? I'm talking, 14 months of really working on being honest with myself and where I was and what headspace I was in, where I can talk about that. If you had met me, even in January of this year, I wouldn't have been able to have this conversation with you. I would have already been in tears crying about, how terrible it was and the trauma bond and, I'm not functioning and all of it was incredibly painful.
Right.
But slowly but surely, and with a lot of patience and work, things begin to get clearer. But I didn't have any clarity until I got into therapy, and my therapist just kept saying, Gretchen, you're just really confused. You're really confused, because there was so much cognitive dissonance. Even in therapy, I kept defending her and asking. Actually, one of the main reasons I went was because she would tell me that I was a narcissist. And so I went to therapy, and the first thing that I said was, you've got to help me. I think I'm a narcissist. And I think that I've, abused people and, and she was like, not picking that up, and typically if you're asking if you are a narcissist, you aren't, because typically that's not something that narcissists have any self-awareness about. So, to be fair, I was terrified because I had heard so many times that I was all of these terrible things. I didn't know that those were projections.
Right. Yeah. The accusations can be confessions. Now,
Correct.
What were you doing to be called that? I think that would be interesting to hear too. Like,
a lot of it was like sort of being set up, like you're just defensive. But I was being put in positions where, and I would say, I feel like I'm fighting a ghost. Like I didn't do these things. You did those things and you said those things. But why do I feel like I'm immediately on the defensive? Because I was being accused. I was being criticized so intensely every day for things that I didn't actually do. So yeah, I was really defensive because I was getting accused of things. I was getting attacked for things that I didn't actually do. Right. And so I would find myself saying, I didn't say that. You said that. I didn't do that. You did that. And then it was just like a mess because nobody was being seen or heard at that point. And so all I could do was just remove myself. So I would get in my car and leave because we didn't live together. And that was also a point of contention, was you should be living with me. How can we create a life if you're not living with me? So it was sort of that traditional, like, you know, often people will say, well, women, they get together and it's very, you know, hot and heavy. And then within 2 weeks, there's a U-Haul and they're moving in together. It's like this, you know,
as a trope.
joke. Yeah, it is.
Okay.
But you know, even when we went to therapy, I would say to the therapist, well, I just don't, you know, I don't feel, I know what our dynamic is. I know how we relate and it's not good. And I don't want my children to see that. So I can't move in with her until the dynamic changes. And the dynamic never changed because the behavior never changed. And so I felt like I was, you know, turning myself into a pretzel and doing all of these, you know, gymnastics to try to accommodate something that never, I mean, it was that classic, the goalposts just kept moving. If I could, you know, I, how can I say it? If I felt like as long as I wasn't getting in trouble for something that I didn't do, I was making it work. You know what I mean?
It's a low bar.
Such a low ball. It was such a low, and I just kept feeling that my needs were just getting less and less prioritized. So I couldn't even speak up about it anymore. It just became a, you're right. Yeah. I know.
Well, because she conditions you to think you were always wrong, and that your thinking and your feeling were always way off base.
Yes. And it was, you know, it was the classic, you'll never find anybody to love you the way I do. No one's going to love you. Who's going to want to be with you? Who's going to want to, you know, you've got so much baggage. Who's going to want to be with you and you're divorced and you have 2 kids? Like, this is the best you're going to do, essentially. And so I began to believe that. And as kind of, I think I thought of myself at one time, you know, prior to this relationship, as somebody who was pretty grounded in herself, but I wasn't. And that's kind of what it taught me. Like, I very quickly allowed myself to be drawn into the shared fantasy. And then I could not see my way out. I could not see my way out until, you know, finally I just, you know, I can't move in with you. I can't. And then it was my fault and my kid's fault. And, you know,
so I think it's important to keep your feet on the ground in the beginning when things are like really feeling good. That's when people get taken advantage of the most, in my experience, right? Because they're feeling good, all of that attention gets to their head. And that, if anything, makes people ignore red flags. It's usually that. Because it's usually those good feelings. If someone can make someone feel good, that will prompt them to possibly ignore a lot of red flags.
Exactly.
And then for the moving in thing, just piecing this back together here, that's more of like a control thing, right? The closer you are to her, the more control she has over you.
Oh, yes.
Is right where she wants you.
Yes. And I had some sense of that. Like, it didn't feel safe. And so that's what I kept sort of following.
A good word there. Safe.
It was really my children. And my therapist brought this up to me, you know, of course, I mean, it seems so obvious when you can be more objective about it, but she was like, well, why did you have a different standard of safety for your children than you did for yourself? And it's because my internal dialogue was, I'm in love with her. I can handle it. It was kind of like, you know, shoot whatever daggers you want at me. I can handle it. I'm tough. I'm thick-skinned. I can handle this part of you because I want the part that actually doesn't exist.
Right.
But I just didn't realize that was the mask. You know, I just didn't know. I didn't know. And while my children were getting love bombed, I didn't know that either. I just didn't see it, Jared. I just totally did not. And that's why I have so much empathy for people who experience this, because it is it's like being in a cyclone. You just don't know which end is up.
Right.
And so much is this kind of fabricated reality that you are just completely sucked into. And it's
Right.
really hard to have, oh, I'm having weird hair. It's hard to have any perspective. It really is. And, without being too like, oh, I was I was totally victimized.
Right.
I do take responsibility for not seeing it. And now that I look back on, how I was just really ripe for this kind of thing, I was ripe for a cult. I was, I would be drawn into anything. I was that
Right.
person.
A little
And
bit of a void. But and I think there's a lot of stories going on here too. I think it's very important to be aware of the stories we tell ourselves. And part of the story was she was portraying herself as the victim, which allowed you to tell the story to yourself that, oh, I can be the one that takes care of her and
exactly,
like save her in a way.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
that's the role that she allowed you to play. And,
yeah,
you were willingly playing at the
yeah,
time.
yeah.
But there's also all these other dynamics of her always criticizing you and making you jump through her hoops. And when that happens, there is no end in sight to that kind of thing, right? They're
Correct,
committed to having it be, they're not going to see it your way.
correct,
And you're always going to be wrong in some way. They're committed to misinterpreting you or
correct.
giving you the least charitable interpretations. And you're always just jumping from one foot to the next. And I
That's
think it's very important, though, like you said, to recognize the stories you tell yourself to justify that, for one. And I like what your therapist said too about how you had a different standard for your children
yeah,
than you do for yourself. And I think I've heard the expression before, you should treat yourself the way you would treat someone you really care about. And if there's a discrepancy there, you would
yes,
treat that person you cared about differently than yourself in a
yeah,
situation. That's something to take a look at, right?
yes,
So
yes.
you'd be willing to not let your children deal with it,
That's right.
but for yourself, oh no, I can handle
I can
this.
handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
That's a good distinction. It's big.
Absolutely. And it was a really big blind spot for me. And um, when she said, "Would you want one of your daughters to be in a relationship like this?" And I was like, "That's an interesting perspective." Hell no is
Ah,
the answer to that. And however, I can say that, but I mean, I also remember at the same time thinking, but I'm in love with her.
hmm,
I'm in love with her. You can't argue with me about that. You know what I
right.
mean? Like, it was this constant back and forth that I would justify the behavior, or I would fall back onto, but that's what I want more than anything. What
Cognitive
I want
dissonance.
more than exactly. And I just didn't know what that was. And so that was so difficult to unravel and so painful, because, it is the way people describe when you're coming out of that trauma bond, it feels like an addiction. It feels like a drug. And I remember saying to my therapist, um, I'm in so much pain and I just want her to hold my hand. Like the person who was the most cruel to me, one of the cruelest people who I was completely attached to, and had my first relationship with a woman with, was her. And um, it was very difficult to separate myself from that wanting, because it did feel like it was filling this part.
Right.
And so that's just the work that we all do coming out of it, is seeing reality for what it is.
That's another seductive tactic there, really. The create the wound and then be the person to comfort the wound. That's
Exactly.
that's actually the story behind Cupid's arrows too. I don't know if you know that story.
Oh, I don't. I don't actually.
Yeah, so Cupid arrows, like it's like a Greek or Roman
Yeah,
thing. I don't remember
sure.
which one it was.
Myth or something.
Something
Yeah.
like that. Where
Yeah.
so Cupid would shoot
Story.
arrows because he knew that people who are fully content, they couldn't fall in love. So when he shoots someone, it creates a wound, and then the wound allows for someone to come in to fill that void and to fix that wound, and they're able to fall in love then. So that's the story behind Cupid's arrows. And
Interesting.
the way you're describing this here reminded me a lot of that. And it's just another version of a seductive tactic that
Right.
narcissistic people kind of seem to do just
Yeah.
naturally. Naturally,
Yeah.
they'll do some of this.
Right. And I think that that was all very well orchestrated by her.
Right.
And it also took me a long time to be able to figure out like what was conscious and what was unconscious, um and I still grapple with it. I still grapple with things sometimes, because there's this part, I think, in a lot of us that really we just want peace, right? I don't
Sure.
want, I'm not trying to trash talk somebody or make somebody completely wrong for, that isn't the point. But the point is that when we have these wounds, if we don't address them and take responsibility for them, we go about our lives bleeding all over everybody else.
Mm.
And that's, another thing that my therapist said, because I would come back to this constantly, like, I just want peace inside. And you have to go through all of this anger and,
Sure.
I mean, I have never been so angry in all my life. And the only way to move through it is to move through it. So feeling this really uncomfortable, like, this is not what I'm used to. This is not, I don't like this. This feels terrible. But we have to move through it in order to get on the other side of it, where we can then pull back a little bit, be a little bit more objective, and just not finger point as much.
Right.
Um, and just allow it to be what it was. But still, that wanting, that, and I knew we could never be friends. It's just not, you can't. There
Right.
had to be no contact. My therapist was very clear. She was like, this is a no contact situation, because I knew if I saw her, oh, forget it. All it would take would be the same strategy that she used in the past. 4 dozen roses showing up on my doorstep. I made a reservation at this resort. Meet me. I have a reservation at this. It's just dinner. We don't need to talk about anything. I mean, I left that relationship 6 or 7 times, and I got sucked back in every time.
That's big to talk about there, because everyone will have their own version of that, right? Where some people I know, a dude will send money, for example, and that's what gets the woman like sucked back in. But there's all these versions of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard of that.
And
That's interesting.
the other thing I was curious about, what were the stories you were telling yourself to stay in? Because I know it's all part of the trauma bond, but
Yeah.
how did you excuse like her behavior to yourself? I think this is important to hear about too.
Yeah. I think that was it's a great question. That was really, I mean, it was really easy for me to blame myself. Self-blame was just really so conditioned.
Okay.
And as you know, with narcissistic types, they don't ever apologize. It's always, we're both responsible. We both did that. We both, even though they went into a massive rage and raged all over you and scared the crap out of you so that you felt like you had to run away, but you're both responsible for that rage, right? It's like, if you had put the dishes away differently, or I don't know, some inconsequential thing, I don't even know, I'm just making that up, that I wouldn't have blasted you. So then there's a part that's like, okay, maybe this is partly me. But it only goes so far. And you start to notice, like I did, to be fair, toward the end, I started noticing she's only ever really nice when she's sucking me back in. And that time period started getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, after being nice, when I would just try to say, I just need you to not yell. I want communication, but please, can you not scream at me? Because, the mood can change on a dime, and you're
Sure.
like, what just happened that now a volcano is erupting and you're not sure what caused it? And sometimes I was set up in a lot of ways for like, well, I get angry when I'm hungry. I get hangry. Like, okay, so I need to make sure you're fed. So it like became like caretaking to a toddler all the time. She's going to have a tantrum if she's not fed. So we got to get food now. I can feel she hasn't eaten. The baby's got fed. I'm experienced in making sure the baby is fed.
Right.
So I could sort of take on that role. Like, are you hungry? Do we need snacks? What do we need to do? How do we plan the day around food that you need to have?
So that's interesting to note there too. So 2 things: the love bombing and devaluing cycle that happens within the relationships too, a lot.
Correct.
It's not just like discarding instantly. It's like, no,
Right.
there's a lot of love bomb, devalue, love bomb, devalue. Love bombs get
It's the
shorter,
abuse cycle.
quicker to devalue. And that
Yes.
happens, it can happen indefinitely, really.
Yes, it can happen indefinitely. I know. I mean, if that's the relationship that you're in, it'll last your whole lifetime if you stay with it. It's just that there is this kind of conditioning where you just expect that is how it goes. And your expectations for how you should be treated start to become so eroded that you just aren't noticing it anymore. And that I found myself making excuses, to people, or like, well, you just don't know her. That's just, I know her. I know how I know how to speak to her.
Right.
Maybe nobody else in the world does, but I do.
That's
And I
another
will be,
interesting point there too.
I will be that person.
Right. And when you're tiptoeing around their moods like that and trying to manage their moods and emotions, or to avoid their uncomfortable feelings, that's another big one to note, because I do see a lot of people fall into that pattern too. It's like, if
Yes.
you're having to work around their feelings and
Yes.
walk on eggshells and do all of those things, jump through hoops to get her to not be upset. Oh, we got to make sure you're fed, can't be hangry. Like, just even going in that direction is the problem, right?
Yes.
Where, because there's no accountability for her and her emotions. It's you, her small trigger that she's saying you did. She's saying that's the problem, which of course is ridiculous. But when you're in that scenario, it's hard to parse it out.
Yes. And then there's this part that gets attached to being able to get it right. Like, I will, did I fail? Did I fail? I failed. I can correct. I can correct that. I'm really capable. I should be smart enough to figure this out, right? How hard could this be?
Right.
This is just finding out what this person's needs are and meeting them. Gretchen, come on.
This is all important to hear. It's very important, because I know this happens to a lot of people, but it's all about just playing the wrong game.
Yeah.
Like, the game would be to not play the game, first of all. But secondly, to take a big step back and say, okay, what am I doing here? Why am I jumping through these hoops and trying to manage all of this?
Yeah.
But again, like you said, when you're in it, it just doesn't come to mind to do that.
Yeah.
But one of the most important things, the power of asking yourself different questions. And you mentioned some of the questions your therapist asked you, but just certain questions, they can really be life-changing if you just hear the right questions.
Yes, it's true. It's really true. And, I remember her also saying, how's your body? How are you, because she knew that I wasn't processing the trauma.
Right.
And I was like, I've been experiencing migraines, for the last year. And even my ex would comment on how much ibuprofen I was taking. And she would, say, you shouldn't take that. You take too much of that. You're addicted to the ibuprofen. But it was such a pressure cooker that's how I was handling it, is that it was all coming out in my nervous system. So I was on this high functioning anxiety. It was affecting my sleep, and I was just pushing through it. And I thought, oh, well, because I've had tension headaches, in the past. But that was also kind of compensatory mechanism
Sure.
of not feeling the feelings and suppressing them, and then it just builds up. And so I thought I was just under a lot of work stress. And so, she would also say, oh, it's because your work is toxic. Your work is toxic. We would work. And my work was also, I don't work there anymore. The work was toxic. But after the discard, the migraine headaches went away. And joint pain. I had a lot of joint pain, and I thought I was experiencing early arthritis from my work. And all of it was symptomatic of my nervous system dysregulation. And so after getting out, after the discard, when I started to just sort of, it's like a tidal wave of emotions that come. Or it did for me. I don't know everyone's experience, but that was how it occurred for me, was that it was just a tidal wave of these emotions that I didn't know were in there. And a lot of the physical symptoms that I had began to resolve.
Right.
And so it was also part of, an objective person in my life asking me, have you noticed? Because I didn't. I explained it away. And she helped me explain it away. Oh, it's your toxic work. It's your toxic work environment.
They're very slippery with that kind of thing. And they throw in just enough truth so that it becomes a plausible explanation. Oh, yeah, it is.
It was tricky.
It is a toxic workplace, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
But I call it slippery. They're very slippery.
Very, very tricky.
And
yeah.
even for me, when I hear other people that will comment to me on social media or whatever, some of them, they are good. They're slippery, and it's hard to really pinpoint it. And I have a lot of awareness, and so do you now. So I could only imagine for people that don't have that awareness, how hard it is.
It is. It is. And, and people do come to my office therapeutically because they learn that I have experience with this. And, while I'm not a therapist, I tell everybody they should go to one.
Sure.
I'm not trying to talk people through their emotional pain, but, acupuncture is an energetic medicine. It does help people connect their mind and their body. And it can be a vehicle for helping people release a lot of emotions. So, there is that need for some objectivity around it. And much of the time, I need to encourage people to go to a therapist because there's so much denial still, or we're going to work it out. And I cannot advise on that. All I can do is, be a safe place for people to be where they are. And like you said, meet people where they are in different places in their journey and their level of awareness, because you can't take it all in at once. You can't. It's too much to take all of it in, all of the awareness at the same time.
Sure. And what you were saying there too reminds me of, basically, it sounds like you were blocked before. And then once there was a discard, all those emotions and things that were getting bottled up, then they come flooding out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And then it was sort of like this gradual, people talk about this fog starts to lift. And that is how it felt to me. And my therapist would say, that's why she would say, you're just really confused, because there was this I think this is real, but my mind is telling me, my mind was still in the storyline that I was getting fed. And it was very difficult to unravel those things. And the longer, though, that I was away and that there was no contact, the more clarity I was able to gain about what was real and what wasn't real.
That's
But
important.
yeah, and having a safe sounding board and someone who was experienced. And also, I had this really unique experience of my therapist had met my ex once. And so I called her immediately after the discard and I was like, I need your help because of all these things that I described before. And I was like, and you met her and I need to know that you saw something, that you picked up something because I'm in so much pain and I'm blaming myself for, you know, this wonderful thing getting away. And
Sure.
she was like, you can have my first available appointment.
Wow.
So,
Well, before I get into what the final straw was to get you to the discard or getting you out of there, there is a super chat I'm going to read here from someone. An
mm,
XL Self says, "This is why we men like to bust each other's egos. A narcissist would get wounded and lash out." And yeah, this is true. I think
mm,
that's a good point. And that's more of amongst like guy friendships, but they're so sensitive
it's
that
relevant. It's
it's
still relevant
hard for
here.
them to do that. And then he
Yeah.
also goes on to
Yeah.
say, "Thanks for sharing your story.
Oh, thank you. That's
I
sweet
really
for you
like
to
how most
say.
narcissists
I
follow a
forget
path."
you forget people are listening when you're when
Well,
we're
good.
just having this talk.
They're
I
here. They're
forget
here.
people are listening to us. Hello. I
So
hope it's helpful.
yeah, so I appreciate the super chat there too. And so what was the final straw in that relationship? What was the discard?
Oh, Jared. Well, um, it played out over a period of time, to be honest, because, there was another relationship that I was unaware of that was going on. Um, and I had always said, and one of the things that I revealed in therapy, thinking that therapy was a safe environment, and it isn't with someone who
Oh,
has
that's something I
narcissistic
want to talk about
abuse.
too, but go
Yeah,
on.
it wasn't safe because everything that I shared in that environment was weaponized later on. And so it came full circle at the time of the discard because I took what I didn't know was this relationship was ongoing with someone in her workplace. Um, and I took my children to go visit my parents for 2 weeks out of state. And I was I invited her to come. And then my children were like, Mom, why? Why did you invite her? Because they were never fans. They were never
Ah,
fans.
so they didn't buy the love bombing.
They didn't. And they got
Okay.
love bombed too, quite a bit, but it didn't work with them.
Interesting.
Another thing that I didn't see, um, eventually I did, but they could see it for what it is, and they would say, she was really mean. Um, or she would undermine me in front of them and say things like, I know your mother better than you do. Or, mom said this, mom said that, or, just very,
That's wild.
and it created this level of anxiety in me that I was always like, I gotta manage them and I gotta manage her and make sure everybody's, happy. And I was in the middle and it was this terrible, terrible thing.
Triangulation is what that is, really.
Totally. Oh, absolutely triangulation. I didn't have any of that vocabulary, but that's exactly what that was. So I was getting triangulated with my kids. I was getting triangulated with this new person. Um, and I'm sure the new person was also getting triangulated with me. And I knew who she was. We had spent some time, the three of us together and whatever. But I didn't see what was going on, or I chose not to see what was going on. And then when I took my girls to visit my parents for 2 weeks, and back to what I had said in therapy was, I said to the therapist, I think that I would be replaced within 2 weeks. If this, I'm pretty sure that, these were my fears that I was bringing up when in
Right.
an environment that I thought was safe. And that's exactly what happened. But it wasn't 2 weeks, it was one day because we were supposed to go on a trip together. And I got dumped over the phone. And she took the other person. And so that was confirmation that what I kind of had a feeling was going on was definitely
Sure.
going on. And, that person was sleeping over, and I mean, it was just
Oh, and
gross.
you
The
knew
whole
that even. You
Oh, I
knew that.
do, because, I
Okay.
did the drive-by, and the car is there, and I needed to know. I confirmed for myself, and
Right.
then that was like, "Okay, now I know. It's confirmed. I don't need to do this again. I'm not trying to stalk anybody. I just need to know that I'm not making it up and that this is what's really going on." And so, again, um, starting very fast, becoming physical. I mean, that they stayed in the same hotel room in the same bed that I was supposed to be in. Eh, Who does
Right.
that? Who does
Right.
that?
Well, it's like
People.
they always say, right? You're not paranoid if you're right.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of the gnarly, terrible details of the
Yeah.
end, um, which I don't like to really revisit. It was pretty awful. And then all of my things that were in her house were just dumped on my porch in garbage bags,
Yeesh.
and that's how that ended.
Yeah.
And then
Not a soft landing there in any way.
no, no. But then I did get like a mild Hoover. After she was already in a relationship with somebody else, she was still trying to text me,
Sure.
and "I'm sorry, it didn't work out. I love you deeply, and my love will always be there," kind of like, "Look, hey, maybe it's not working out with this girl, so you'd be really great supply
Sure.
still."
Sure.
And so that's when my therapist was like, "This isn't safe. This isn't safe in any sense of the word. So in order to preserve yourself, this needs to be no.
Right.
This needs to be a
She
block."
wanted you on the back burner there
Oh, for
in case
sure.
something wasn't gonna work out.
Oh,
And
yeah, and
2
it
other
didn't.
things to note
Yeah,
there too. And this is something I could see people using as an excuse, like, "Oh, they can't be so bad. She wants to go to therapy. She
yeah,
wants to go to therapy to work on the relationship." The
yeah.
fact that she was willing to do that, I think that's an interesting thing to point
Mhm,
out
yeah.
there. And
Yeah,
we're not
more
gonna.
maybe of the covert variety.
Yes, they're the ones that would normally do it that way.
Mhm,
There's a
yeah.
great book by Debbie Mirza, The Covert Passive Aggressive Narcissist. I don't know
Mm,
if
I
you're
haven't looked at.
familiar with that, but she talks a lot about that kind of thing, how they can fool
Yeah,
therapists, they say
yeah.
all of the right things, etcetera,
Oh
but
god, yes.
it can
Yeah,
take a while for people to really get it.
yeah. I mean, I
And
even remember her sort of like bragging to me what because at one point I laid down, a little bit of a boundary, and I said, I said, "You need to figure your shit out," is those were my exact words. And I was like, "Something's wrong here, and I have gone through all of the ways that I know how to try to make you happy, and nothing works. There's never enough. And so I'm at a loss. I need you to figure your shit out." And so she did go to a therapist. She went to a therapist that one of the flying monkeys goes to. So they
Ah,
share a therapist. So that's also a way of like, look, it's not me. Look, it's not me. Look, it's not me. It's not me. It's not me. I go to a therapist. But what she said to me was, "Oh, the therapist loves me because I pay cash. And
okay.
I,
And
like,
in that forum, in that light too, you sharing it that way, I see it also as her trying to make you look a little
yeah,
ridiculous too.
yeah."
Like,
And
"Oh, my
it was,
therapist loves me. I don't
yeah,
know what your problem
yeah,
is with me,
yeah.
but my
And
therapist loves me."
and to be fair, I wasn't seeing a therapist at the time. So it was kind of like, "Look, I'm in therapy. You're not. You're the one who's not.
So that's sneaky.
So
Sneaky and tricky.
yeah, it really was." And then that was sort of the storyline to who the people who became the flying monkeys was,
Right,
Gretchen's really problematic. And
right. But it's also important to note, we're not gonna get into this part, but part of the helping profession too, that does happen where people will be in those professions, and
yeah,
just because they're helping and just because they're doing things to help
yeah,
others,
yeah.
doesn't mean they don't have, like, narcissistic adaptations. That's important to remember.
That's true. That's true. And yeah, there will be people who are drawn to helping professions, um,
Because
because
it's
we
good
all need
supply.
them, and it's good supply. Yeah. I mean, I love my work. I love what I do. And yes, it's okay to get satisfaction out of your work, but you're not socially engaging with your patients like some,
Right.
In fact, one of the things that happened to me when I first tried to go out, and I haven't dated anybody. I'm very happily single right now.
Oh, okay.
But
That's important to note too.
yeah, it feels really good to be on my own right now. And I know that's kind of a phase, but it does feel really good. But I did get fixed up, because people want to help you, and they're like, "Oh, you're such a this person, and I know these people, blah, 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 and I know someone, and she's single, and da, 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 and trying to fix you up." And so I went out with this person who turned out to know my ex therapeutically, who then was just, became a flying monkey
Oh
because,
no.
and all I could say was, "Okay, I'm sorry. Bye."
And so she was basically saying to you how your ex
No,
is
"Oh,
great.
she's so wonderful. She's so
Oh,
great. She helped me so much." Yeah, therapeutically, she can do the job,
sure.
but everything is transactional. Everything is transactional. She's not in it for that. She's in it for
Right. And
different
like I
reasons.
said, that's important to know too, where like if they will help people if there's something in it for them. They can take credit, they can get money, it makes them look good, it helps their
Yeah.
image, or they can help them build a community. Like all those are all things that will prompt them to also help. But deep down, you got to look the true motivations. The true motivations are the supply. The helping of others is just the after effect
Yeah.
of them doing what they really want to do. And
Yeah.
I say this because it does trick a lot of people,
Mhm.
and they don't think that person's capable. Oh, they can't be because they're doing this, this, and this. It's like,
Yeah.
are you sure? Are you
Yeah.
sure they can't?
Exactly. It's very much that kind of, and I fell prey to that too, because I saw her in this light. I really did. I thought she was, brilliant clinician, and you know, um, I just had these, you know, ideas about her that actually weren't real. I mean, even when I look back, when I tried asking about, like, even, what is it that you like about me? Like, she couldn't even really answer that question. You know, I could answer the question about the things that I liked about her,
Right.
um, and how I wanted to try to work within the relationship to make us both better, or work on myself. And it was always just more like, well, you if you just don't trigger me, then everything's fine. Like, that was the sort of answer for everything. And I was like, but
Blame shifting.
yeah, I didn't install these buttons, man,
Right.
How am I responsible for all of it? And, to be fair, there are people who are in secure relationships who can help each other heal. I do believe that that's true. But with someone who is struggling with these kinds of traits, I really believe that that's almost impossible. Like, we just want to believe. I mean, I wanted to believe that, this was my soulmate. I mean, I really, really, really wanted that. I bought into the shared fantasy for sure.
Right. I mean, people have to be willing to help themselves.
Yeah.
If someone's going to put in some footwork, which makes like her going to therapy more tricky to me too. The fact that it would appear like she was
Yeah.
doing some footwork,
Oh
but
yeah, nothing got better. The behavior never changed. Yeah, never.
and that's ultimately though the thing, right? Where
Exactly.
if they can take accountability,
Right.
admit when they're wrong,
Right.
admit what they could be doing better.
Right.
Okay, at
Right.
least there could be a
Right.
shot in
Right.
that scenario. But
Right.
if they can't admit they're wrong and it's
Yes.
always just your fault,
Yes.
then
Yes.
nothing has changed.
Yes, and you can, I remember saying all the time, "I can't win. I really can never win," because the answer was always, "Well, this is how I am." When I would say, "I just the screaming at me, and the shouting, and the raging, is there a way you can communicate that doesn't include that? That really is hard for me to, absorb all of that.
Right.
And I would just get, well, that's how I am. You have to accept all of me for how I am.
Very dismissive.
Very dismissive. And then I would then say, like in therapy, well, that's how she is. And then I would get, that's what you always say. That's just how I am. But that's what you told me is the way to, you know what I mean? Like, so there was no way to win, Jared. And I think that's what ultimately exhausted me. And when I finally went to therapy, I was like a balloon that just got deflated. I was literally just like a shell of myself. And my therapist just said, you're exhausted, aren't you? And I was like, this is the kind of exhaustion that sleep does not fix.
Sure.
And I mean, I think the first 6 months, I was just trying to wake up in the morning. And I still had my children to take care of, and I still had a full-time job and, other things that it was so a lot. And I'm just so grateful that things are more stable now. But I really did have to be very patient with myself and take care of myself, learn to, my therapist said, I want you to take yourself out to dinner. I want you to go out to dinner. And I get that that's a very could be considered a very privileged thing. Maybe not everybody their self-care can be, I'm going to get takeout because it's expensive. Takeout is expensive these days. Yeah. And even for me, I was like, I have all this therapy to pay for. And, so going out for dinner was kind of a treat, but I did it. And I picked a restaurant that I wanted to go to, and I brought a book. I brought a book, the newest one by Young Pueblo, Lighter.
Okay. I don't know that one.
I was reading Young Pueblo's beautiful writer. And his new book is called Lighter. I highly recommend it. And I was reading that and having dinner, taking myself out to dinner and, making myself Epsom salt baths and going to sleep early. I didn't watch any television. Television was, I couldn't even get through a movie. Anything that seemed like it was on TV was too much. I could barely even read books. My nervous system was so off that I had trouble just being still. So I had to really slow down and start practicing mindfulness and meditation and listening to guided meditations and going on walks. I walked every day that I could. I would go on walks. Sometimes I took my girls with me. I'd say, who wants to go on a walk? If they didn't want to come, I would just say, I'll be back in 30 minutes. I'm going on a walk. And in order to move my body.
Sure.
And it was all of those things, all of those little things over time. I remember saying to my therapist, this just seems like so many little steps to such an enormous problem that I'm having, such a huge wound that I have to heal in myself. I just don't see how all of these little things like Epsom salt baths and getting, rigatoni is going to help. And she was like, just keep doing it. Just keep taking care of yourself.
Right.
And kind of like you were saying earlier, treat yourself like you would your mother, the mother that you always wanted, or a good friend, or use language internally with yourself that's gentle and kind.
Sure.
And try to avoid I was so stupid. Oh my God. I said so many times in therapy, oh my God, it was so stupid. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe I did this. I did this. I did this. I was so dumb. I was so this. I was so that. And she was like, yeah, that's really not nice.
Yeah. I would call that out. I would say, don't talk bad about yourself.
Yeah, don't talk bad about yourself. It just feels really difficult to soften at that time, because there's
Sure.
so many complex emotions that were, I was so angry. I was angry at myself. I was angry at her. I was angry at society for, like you're saying, these movies. And I didn't make up, these things that we all buy into. I didn't create that. We're all just doing the best that we can with this framework that we sort of have to unlearn and
Yeah,
unravel,
absolutely.
where we are within all of it. And some of that's really painful because we start to understand that we had these beliefs about ourselves that just weren't true. And that was kind of driving the ship. And there's a grieving that goes with that. I
Sure.
had to grieve a lot of lost time. And so yeah, that's part of the pain. That's part of that pain
Now,
process.
how long after the breakup did you start therapy?
Oh, immediately. I was messaging the therapist the day of the discard. I was
Oh,
like,
it's quick.
"This is it. Here it is. It's happened. It's over." But then there was also this, I was so programmed to expect her to hoover me that I was hyper vigilant.
Hmm.
It was like, is she following me? Is she, because she would show up. She would just show up at my work, or she would show up at my door, or she would, and she was preoccupied with someone else. So she wasn't showing up.
Right.
But that was also the time that I needed to get clear. So I was in therapy immediately. I had the first available appointment, which I think was 3 weeks. And it felt like the
Hmm.
longest 3 weeks of my life. And I was
Sure.
like, whatever cancellation you have, please, I will take it if something comes up. But that was the first available that I could get, was 3 weeks with her.
Sure.
And
And I
then after
think,
that, every week.
and it's important, like you were saying, all of those little things, the little acts of self-care, they add up. And I tell people to, rather than try to attack the whole pie, take
Yeah.
things one small piece at a time. All you can do is take one small step at a time. No act of improvement is too small. No act of self-love can be too small. But those little things done consistently, the consistently part is key, but they have a big compound effect when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
And that's why I always stress to people, it's not too small of a thing to do. If you add it to your routine and do those little things and keep on doing them,
Yeah.
the compound effect of that, like I can see it just in your face as I talk to you, that you've done a lot of work on yourself, and you can tell it with the level of peace that you have, which, yeah, it's seen, but people in the moment, they don't see it themselves sometimes.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, if you could have seen me, like I said, even, I don't know, 10 months ago, I mean, I didn't even know. And that feels like a short amount of time. And at the same time, after a month, I was saying to my therapist, why am I still a mess? And then after 2 months, why am I still a mess? And after 3 months, how long is this going to take?
Mm-hmm.
What am I doing wrong? Why is this not like happening on my timeline?
Right.
And she said, Gretchen, you're not very patient. Not a very patient person. And she wasn't wrong. Like, I just think that I expected to snap out of it, but I didn't realize that 6 years, I mean, other people have done it for many, many more. And but 6 was what it was for me. And it did the damage that it did in that amount of time. And it took a lot of work just to get this. And I'm not like finished. I'm a work in progress. And I've got therapy on Wednesday, and I still work on a lot of things, not just for myself, but for my daughters. One of the things that I said to my therapist was, I need to make sure that I'm not passing down these behaviors to my children. I really
Sure.
want to be the best parent that I can to them. So it's really important to me that, if you see something weird in me, or if I tell you something and you're like, oh yeah, that's really suspect, Gretchen, you need to explore whether or not you have this, embedded problem. I need to know. So I was constantly asking, well, maybe I'm borderline, maybe I'm bipolar, maybe, she was like, if I saw that, I would tell you, so it is very, and not to say that those are terrible diagnoses either. But what I mean is, if it is someone who has narcissistic personality disorder or tendencies, they're not self-reflecting in that way. Even somebody with some other kind of mental illness is at least doing the work in some regard, or they are, working with a psychiatrist to help them with their medication. There isn't one right way to do this. And so I just want everyone to feel validated. I want everyone to feel like, whatever I say, if it works for you and if it resonates, that's the whole point. And if it doesn't, I apologize, because I can't see anybody. I don't know, God forbid I'm offending somebody with my words, because there isn't one right way, and everyone is allowed to be as they are. And that's the whole point. And I even, that's how I felt about my abuser, was, you can be however you want. I'm not going to try to change you.
Right.
You be how you are, and I'll try to fit in some way, and that doesn't work either.
Well, I always say to people, like I told you before we started, when you share honestly exactly how it was for you, that will help the most amount of people. And like you said, it might not, like the way you're talking about things, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it's great. But some people might find a way to be offended somehow. I've learned that from doing what I do. Nothing surprises me what someone might be upset about. So
to that person, I apologize if I said anything that might have offended you.
And if that's the person, if they're somehow someone is offended by it, I would say, then just go find someone that a story you resonate with more. And there's no judgment about it. It's just you go where you got to go, that where you think you're going to get the help.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
I always tell people, find the helpers. You will find, I found so many strangers who helped me. It was kind of unbelievable. It's sort of like that, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Some people say that one.
Sure.
And I did feel like when I was ready to start working on myself, that the people who I needed showed up. I mean, you and I kind of got to know each other, right? Just through this vehicle. Sure. And, I've met a lot of really deeply genuine people who have suffered a lot. And it does take a certain level of self-awareness to be able to share, and to allow people to have their own truth and to have their own story, and not to, try to jam your story down someone's throat. But yeah, we all find our way. We all find our way. And I found my way through other people who helped me, and also by reading books by people who had been where I was. I found Shahida Arabi, and I found Dr. Ramani, and, some of those other authors that we mentioned, Jackson McKenzie, I found, and all of them said something that spoke to me and helped me feel validated. And that's why I think it's important to share stories, not to shame anybody or shame anybody's personality style or type, or, the truth is we're all doing the best that we can, and everybody deserves to be seen and loved, period.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it, where, like I said, whatever helps people is what I am all for. And whoever you get the help from, as long as it helps, I'm all for that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that helped me was I framed like my experiences as, what was the universe trying to teach me with all of this? And one of the answers I came up with was, practicing radical self-respect. So have you put it through that lens in your own life before?
Oh, for sure. Yes.
Perhaps you could share what the universe, you think, is teaching you with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love how you, because I use universe also. And, some people have different terms for that, but universe is the term that resonates with me also. And that's the one that I use. And the universe has helped me with my own self-awareness, my own self-reflection. It's helped me learn that we all are kind of innocently wounded in some way, but our responsibility, I think, is to do the best that we can. And it's through our relationships that these things are going to come up. That's just how it
Absolutely.
works. It doesn't work in a vacuum. So we do all of it relationally. And this was a little bit of a tricky thing for me because it's kind of hard to put into words, but I think I got stuck a lot in like the forgiveness thing. Like, do you forgive, or how do you move forward? And I think that what I learned from my experience and what I feel like the universe allowed me to experience was that all of the feelings, all of the emotions are necessary, all of them, even the difficult ones. Because if we're not experiencing the difficult ones, we also are blocking the good ones. So we don't get to experience joy when we somehow decide that being angry is not okay, or we shouldn't express it. So that was something that was very valuable to me, but I needed somebody to affirm that. I
Sure.
needed a therapist and good, close friends, my sister, people who could allow me to be at my worst, but still say, you're going to be all right. I know who you are. And you're still figuring it out, but I know that the core of you, and you'll find your way back to that. And it will get better. But there isn't a magic wand, there isn't something that, I wish I had had a magic wand and I could have made all of those uncomfortable feelings go away. And, I remember my therapist also, she was like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like, it doesn't have to be this person's good or, all good, all bad, right? Some of that black and white thinking that sometimes happens. And so that was really comfortable for me because I saw lots of things as gray. And I needed to be angry. I needed to see that these things weren't okay. And that to protect myself was to say no to that, even if it was something that I thought that I wanted. And that was hard to come to that. Even though you feel compelled to this thing, it does not mean that it is good for you.
That's a big one to remember.
Okay to let that go. But that was so hard because that in the moment, that was all I wanted. That was what I thought the Band-Aid to make it all feel better was to go back to this person who had created all of this chaos. And so coming to the realization that it was never going to be healthy because neither of us were coming from a healthy place.
Right.
And then, just understanding that there are going to be limitations to this, and it's never going to be reciprocal. You can be as vulnerable as possible, and that's never going to be safe. But I needed someone to tell me that, so that I didn't feel like I was just victimizing myself and, putting all the blame on somebody else.
That
I
makes
had
sense.
responsibility for, my part in that. So, yeah.
So you seem to have a good attitude towards the whole situation, and perhaps even towards her too. So perhaps I'd like to hear about how you look at her. Like, do you forgive? Did you let go of resentment? How do you
I think
see
it's
the
still in,
situation
I
now?
think that's still in process. I think that that's still in process. I mean, oh, I have, you know, I think I saw her 11 months after, and my reaction was, you know, a lot of, you know, words that I shouldn't say. But it was, you know, through a car. It was like a drive-by situation. I was just walking my dog, and there she was, you know, in her car, and I was completely taken aback. And the immediate thing that came up was a lot of anger, like very angry. But it was very brief, and you know, it was like a, I won't say it, but it was basically like if I put my middle finger into words, that's what it
Mm.
was. And you know, it was basically like, but you know, to be fair, you know, it was like rolling up, like, hey, what's up? You look good. And I was like, the heck is that? Like, not that any of this happened. Like, whoa, what kind of reality is that? Nothing transpired. I wasn't in the darkest hole of my life, and you just roll up like we're good. Wow. I like that was one of the biggest aha moments. Like that was actually a good thing. And then I got to sort of have my anger, like, screw you. This is like, if you think I'm even remotely interested in that garbage, no. The door is slammed shut on you. And so that moment felt empowering, but at the same time, I was exhausted after it. Like it was just, it was like
Mm.
the energy vampire sucked me dry in that brief moment. Um, and so then I had to work backwards, you know, from that, and you know, talk to my therapist about it, and da 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 da. So I've worked from that point, and now, yeah, I felt my feelings. I felt my feelings, but I've done all of this myself with, you know, different therapies that I've been utilizing. Um, and so I feel good about the work that I've done. And so I feel like there's like this quality about what you begin to build for yourself that is like, no one can take that from me. No matter what happens, I've got myself. I have my own back, and I know who I am, and I know I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I know that the life that I'm trying to live is an authentic one. And we all screw up. We all do the best we can, right? But we all make mistakes. And I'm here to admit my mistakes, right? I'm not trying to pretend that I'm a perfect person. Um, and I feel good about that. Like that's much more comfortable than trying to pretend like we've got it all figured out.
Right.
That's, you know,
Well, I think
um,
it's important you let yourself feel all of those emotions too, because if you were to try to stuff any of them,
yeah.
those would be the ones that would probably get you caught up, and
Yes,
you'd be
exactly.
stuck on them. But when you
Yes.
feel it, it's like the expression, you got to feel it to heal it. That's
Yeah.
how you get to the end of it, where you're
Yes.
best able to like let go of resentments and
Yeah.
whatever.
I
And I
think
think,
so. I
and
think so.
people, I think, misunderstand the word forgiveness a lot
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
I would say just because
It's
you
sticky.
forgive someone doesn't mean you have to let them back into your life, that
No.
kind of
And
thing.
and I don't think it's about forgiving the person necessarily. I'm not suggesting anybody forgive anybody, because sometimes people do horrendous things, and they you know, this isn't about going and finding them and
Right.
having, you know, your special moment. That isn't going to happen with these types. It's too dangerous to search for that. And I mean, I fantasized about it, like that I was going to get an apology, and I was going to be, you know, I'm so sorry what I did to you. That must have been so hurtful. I
Oh,
can't imagine what you went through when, you know, I dumped you like that and went off with somebody else on the same day. And then you know, like it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Um, so I don't necessarily think it's about that, at least immediately. Like, I'm not going to try to counsel anybody about that. I think that's really, everyone needs to figure out what works for them. And I think there can be a lot of different ways through this, but, with different kinds of abusive situations, I just don't think that forgiveness is the thing. A lot of times it's, you don't have access to me. That's how I protect myself. And part of it is, I need to forgive myself for, some of my the grief, for some of the grief that I had to experience. Like, that's part of it, is grieving what I didn't know.
Right.
And forgiveness is kind of like the wrong word. It's more like accepting things as they are and seeing it in reality, rather than this kind of story that felt better than what was real.
Right.
Does
That's
that
why I
make
say to
sense?
people, yeah. I mean, I say, feel your emotions. I tell everyone, don't stuff anything. Feel whatever you're feeling, and
Yeah.
then try to look at it in a way that best helps your life today.
Yeah.
So that doesn't necessarily mean forgiveness. That's why I like to say letting go of resentment, because
Yeah,
resentment can
although
hurt.
the resentment, yeah, the resentment doesn't feel good. And I think that, but here's the thing. I think when we keep working on ourselves, it just happens. Like, it's not an active releasing. Like, you can do ceremony if you want, or, and some of those things
I
do
see what
help.
you're saying.
But I think as we keep focusing on our own needs and on filling ourselves from the inside, these things just don't have room to hang out anymore. Like, I and all of us, I think our goal ultimately is to embody ourselves, to be all of me in there,
Right.
without these holes where I'm looking for some external thing to help me feel better, to make my feelings feel better. If I'm embodying myself, there isn't room for some little thing to come creeping in.
That
There's
makes sense.
less room for it. And when there's more self-awareness, then we can sort of sense it before it has time to get in. And that's part of what allows us to let go of these things. It's like, that's not fun for me to chew on anymore.
Right.
Like, I'm having fun trying on happiness. I'm
I
going to
can see
have
that.
fun trying on joy. I'm going to have fun trying on listening to comedians and going, I don't know, whatever. Something, making yourself laugh, laughing with other people, you
Laughter is
know?
sometimes the best medicine, they say.
Yeah, it's a way of, right? There's a resonance to
Right.
it. And so, that forgiveness one is, I think, really tricky. And so I do think, though, that there is some value in acknowledging that we all have wounding, but it's our responsibility with what we do with it.
Absolutely.
And
I
so
agree with
that
that.
does not allow people to go bleed all over everybody else. That's not okay. And so a lot of these personality types will do that. They're not addressing, they might be going to therapy, but they're just bitching about everybody else. They're
Right.
not actually doing anything, or at least that was the experience
Right.
that I
And a
saw,
good therapist would hopefully stop that and to
hopefully.
get the attention back on that person.
Yeah.
But also, I just think having the universe teach me a lesson and have that be the guiding
Yeah.
principle, the rest did kind of take care of itself when I just saw it as,
Yeah.
yeah, this
Yeah.
is what I
It
think was
falls
going
into
on.
place. Yeah.
So it's
Some
not like an
things,
active thought with it, like, oh, I got to do
yes.
this or do that. It
And
just kind of happens
yes, and
over time.
that's reassuring, because I think that it feels like for a lot of survivors, there's so much efforting. It's so much work, and it's exhausting work. And I think um, it can be reassuring to know that there will become an effortlessness at a certain point where you're kind of you're on the wave, you're that wave, part of the bigger ocean, and you're acknowledging it, and you're finding your people, and you're finding your tribe or whatever. You're finding the things that are making you feel jazzed about your life. And that getting there feels like it's such a far distant hike, but you're seeing 14 months. It's not that long. And believe me, I'm giving myself a good 2-3 years. So I'm just in the first third of what I'm expecting to be, what I'm allowing for myself as
Right.
the process that I'm open to. I don't want to skip any steps, Jared.
That makes sense.
I don't want to do this again, like I feel like the universe is like, okay, sister.
Well, I mean, you're doing the small steps and you're not in a new relationship. So I think that's something a lot of people do too, whether they're the narcissistic person or not. They'll jump into the next relationship to maybe avoid how they're feeling.
For
So I
sure.
think it's very important that
Oh,
you haven't done that. And I think that's something to note too.
Not that I didn't, of course I was like, what's wrong with me? They've just moved on. They're so happy, and that of course lasted less than 5 months. Like that wasn't, that was the thing that you don't do. And so neither of them were very happy, regardless of what the pictures looked like, right? It doesn't, that Band-Aid doesn't work. So yeah, I really want to, if I'm going to really be present for myself and, be able to be present for somebody else, I really want to be able to honor, somebody at some point. But I really want to give that to myself, so I know how that feels. I really want to feel, what does it feel like to be loved by me?
The things you're doing, I think, are that, right? The taking yourself out to dinner, the Epsom bath, salts, all that kind of stuff. That's what it is.
Yeah. And then I think that starts to come from the inside, and then we have an abundance to share. Eventually, we have an abundance to share because we're tapping into the thing that doesn't have a limit. It's not like, oh, there's only so much energy and I need it from it. No, we're going to find that there's plenty for everybody. There's plenty of that energy to go around. There's plenty of that love to go around. And so I'm experiencing what it feels like to be loved by myself. And then I can feel like, all right, that feels good. Maybe that would feel good to somebody else to be around that, which I want to share someday.
Yeah, I mean, it starts with each individual, right? Where they got to learn to be in a good place on their own.
Yeah.
When they're in a good place on their own, they're best able to be in a healthy relationship with somebody else, where they can learn each other's love languages, etc., and communicate and work as a team.
For sure.
Ultimately, that's the thing.
Yep.
Now, here's a question for you that I've been hearing. It's one of the tougher ones for me to address, especially when women talk to me about them. But there's a lot of women that get trapped and they really think that there's just no way out. Like their husband, or maybe his girlfriend even sometimes too, they say, oh, they have control over everything in my life.
Yes.
And they've talked to our family, friends, everyone's like a flying monkey of them. What would you suggest for someone in that situation that thinks there's no way out, thinks they're completely stuck? And I want to make sure I validate it. I'm sure they are stuck.
Yo, yes.
But at the same point, I want to also encourage them to keep trying to do something to get out, as opposed to just giving up, I guess. It's a sensitive topic. I know people get annoyed or act like I'm maybe victim blaming or something, but that's why I'm asking you. What would you suggest in those kinds of scenarios?
I think it's fair to be very cautious about victim blaming when it comes to this. And again, these are so nuanced and different for each couple and what's going on with them. That
hard to give general in that.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any one answer for this, to be fair. I can only speak from my, situation, and I have a history of being with, very controlling people. And so, yes, I was able to get out of a marriage, but I also have a way to earn an income.
Right. That's
And,
big.
it wasn't easy to go out on my own, but I had some ability to take care of myself and my children. And I don't get any spousal support. Like, I'm not getting, I'm on my own. We split health insurance in the middle, and that's it. And, if I buy clothes, we share those expenses. But for my kids, I don't get any. I'm by myself, which I like.
Right.
I'm grateful that I have that and that I have some independence. But I mean, if I didn't have that, it would have been a completely different situation. Had I lived with my abuser, I would have been in a completely different
Right.
situation, and it would not. I mean, I did immediately after my divorce, we did live together because I was kicked out of that house. And we did live together, and I had to get my first apartment without telling my narcissistic ex, because that was a betrayal, having
Mm.
my own place. And I just didn't see a way forward with bringing my children in. I just didn't see it. But we could never discuss me needing a safe haven for myself.
And it wasn't
Um,
acceptable to have because
it
it'd
wasn't
be a
acceptable.
threat to their control.
Completely.
But this,
Complete.
I would also say this for anyone who doesn't have the financial means, because you're saying you
Yeah.
did have the
Yeah.
financial means, so it
Yeah.
made it a little easier for you. But what I would say to someone that didn't have that, perhaps, is you just gotta call your local state, call the local county, even perhaps, and look into what kind of programs are available for someone that's in that kind of situation,
I mean,
because
yes.
there
Yeah,
are
you could
some.
do that. I mean, the women who I know, I just don't know of any men, but it could be the same. There could be a similar situation with men, so I don't want to, or non-binary, whatever people. I think that they too can experience this, so we don't need
Sure.
to genderify it. Um, I I think that the women who I know who have gone through this moved in with a relative in the meantime, when they had to leave the home for safety reasons, or because they just couldn't take it anymore, or it dawned on them, I have to do it this way. Um, they moved in with a family member, and just had I mean, that's very hard. You have to either just abandon all of your things, and for me, that was something that I was willing to do. I abandoned all of my stuff many times. I was like, I don't need my clothes. I'll buy more clothes. Keep my bike, keep my whatever. She ended up bringing most of it back. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, most of it back. Because she didn't want it either. How was she going to have the new girl over with all my stuff there? She had to
True.
dump it,
True.
right? So, yeah, I mean, the new girl was going to be coming over that night, probably, or that day. So she had to dump it pretty quick.
Right.
Um,
I think even making a plan to leave, that's one of the things because it
yeah,
can be
you
dangerous.
do yes,
So
it's
notify
very
friends,
tricky.
family, sometimes
Yeah,
law enforcement,
yeah,
depending on the scenario,
yep, you
and
need
make
a
a
support
plan.
network.
If you
Mhm.
have friends and family, try to stay with them. If not, look into resources that are available through the state.
Yeah,
And I'm only bringing this up because it is a question that I get a
of
lot,
course,
and it's one
that's
of the harder
valid.
ones to answer
It's
because,
very
again,
hard.
it depends on the situation.
It
Each
does.
individual scenario will have different variables.
Yes.
So I try to just give people a general framework.
Yeah, safety is number 1, um, and if you can find someone who you can get a safe haven with, and then you just can't let them know where you are.
True.
It's not safe to, because there, a lot of times, I mean, it happened to me. I would get banging on my door, and not just like knocking, hello, are you home? And then walking away, banging for an hour and then sitting on the porch waiting for me to come home, thinking I wasn't inside. And then eventually, so it can be
That's pretty wild.
it
That's
can be
pretty
very
extreme that they would even do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have to tell all of the horror stories, but I get it. What I say that just because I understand that that there's a lot of fear of how this person will react.
Yeah, I mean, because that's bullying and intimidating is really what that
Yeah,
is.
I mean, yeah, whatever it is, it's extremely uncomfortable, and not to mention embarrassing. Your neighbors can hear it. It's very it's a bad situation. So
Sure.
I really empathize with that. And there is a lot of anxiety around, well, how am I even going to start to unravel myself from this very complicated enmeshment?
Sure.
So I wish I had a really good, I mean, I would say if you can afford therapy, go there first and see if you can work out a plan with a therapist. A lot of times they have knowledge of resources or access to resources, or they know someone who you can call, or they're aware of housing that you might be able to qualify for or be eligible for. But it speaks to, and this is one of the other things that the universe showed me, is that as much as we might feel like we are completely alone, we're not alone in this, and we're not meant to do it alone. People will come and they will have ideas, or they'll have a way for you to go, or they'll have a lifeline that you can grab onto until the next lifeline comes
And
you're
that's
ready
important
for
to
the
know
next
too.
step.
The trauma bond will get people thinking things aren't possible, but
Yes.
could be possible. And
Yes.
that's where you really got to be sensitive to. I know I'm not like going to blame you, but you might be in a trauma bond right now where they've convinced you certain
Yes.
things are not possible.
That's right.
But they could really be possible to someone who was not in that situation, and they're looking
Right.
from the outside in and say, "Oh yeah, you could do this," but the narcissistic person or other abuser has got them convinced, no, none of
That's right.
that is even possible.
That's right. And most people in this position are in a very dysregulated state all of the time. And
Right.
so that level of stress, that level of battling the fawn response or fight or flight response, or whatever it is that your body is trying to protect you from this threatening situation, it doesn't allow for a lot of really clear thinking. And so being able to see the options becomes almost impossible.
Right, and that's why
So
running it by someone else, I think, can be so
yes,
important, whether
yes,
it's a therapist or a trusted
yes,
friend or
yes,
some sort of coach, just someone, another objective party.
yes, yeah. Someone who can help you through some of those, because it's very, this is where some of the work that I had to do on not blaming myself for not doing it differently or not doing it sooner, or it is what it is. And blaming ourselves for not doing it a different way when we have hindsight isn't really helpful at all.
Right.
So yeah, it made me think of that forgiveness topic, and that's maybe a good example of something that I had to forgive myself for. Why didn't you do it differently, Gretchen? Why didn't you see these things? It's
You just
okay.
didn't know what you didn't know.
You didn't know
Yeah.
what you didn't know. And when you're so hyper vigilant, it is really hard to see that you have options, that you
Right.
can, or to have the energy and the motivation to dig yourself out of this really dark pit. It literally requires somebody to reach up and help you. It really is, I think, how that works.
Right. I think those are good suggestions. And perhaps we can close on this part here too. What would be your suggestions to someone who's in that kind of scenario, a scenario that is similar to what you were in before? What would you share with someone in that spot? And then
Mm.
also your closing thoughts on your scenario too.
I think if I could have done it differently, I would have gotten a therapist, an individual therapist sooner, like even while I was in the relationship. Um, and
Individual is key for that too, because you
yeah,
did
not
have a
the
couples
couples
therapist.
yes, and the couples therapy, I mean, we did it for 2 years, and full disclosure, we had 4 different therapists. It wasn't until we landed on a couples therapist who didn't believe in personality disorders.
Oh, that's when she chose that one?
That's when so she picked that one, who only believed in attachment theory and not in
Hmm.
any sort of like, it was just, you either make it work and you notice your pattern and you each work on your side of the street, or it wasn't like, guess what? You're getting blocked and gaslit and sideline, none of
Interesting.
that was acknowledged. And I was even told, people throw around the word abuse. We really shouldn't call, but he didn't know what was
It's
going. And
important to know there's therapists like that
yes,
don't believe in, personality disorders, and I guess
yes.
they would say that, "Oh, that person's more of an avoidant attachment then," or something like that,
I
and
don't know. I did write him a letter. I wrote him an email after I had done some work, and I was like, "Look, I really want you to know what this was, and I don't think you saw it." And he was very compassionate, and he was like, "I'm sorry that I
good.
didn't help you when I could have, and I feel for your situation." Like he was, but he couldn't really, admit exactly what happened.
Well, it'd
But
be too
he
much
did.
against his worldview.
Yeah,
It would've
I
really
did.
challenged his worldview.
I described the cycle of abuse and what I was experiencing, so I know he knows what that is.
Right.
So, with the sort of, permission about, I had my therapist read it before I sent it, and I was like, "Do you think this is a good idea? I just feel like I want him to know, because nobody should go through 2 years of couples therapy and feel
True,
threatened every single. I mean,
true.
I got, berated in the parking lot for 45 minutes after every single session. That's not normal."
It seems like that guy was enabling her to
Yeah,
continue
well,
some of this
guess who
stuff.
was paying, Jared?
Right,
Guess who was paying?
right.
Again, it's sort of like this, well, I pay,
A
so I guess
conflicted
I pay.
interest there too, right? That's and a
Yeah,
lot of the helping stuff, the money can get in
yeah.
the way of the help
I
sometimes.
I
But
think that's kinda what happened there.
it sounds like it. But I would also say any therapist or psychiatrist or psychologist or counselor, whatever it is, that is too entrenched in their way of thinking and their
Yeah,
belief, and they'll just dismiss
yeah,
completely other areas of
mhm,
psychology. That's something I would be hesitant to go for,
yeah,
because there are people, and we talked about this before we went live, that there are people that only believe in their own way. And so that
that's true,
person's like, this is just
that's
attachment
right.
stuff.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
the you're insecure attachment or
Yeah,
avoidant attachment
right,
or anxious attachment,
yeah,
and all this other stuff doesn't exist.
that's right. It's just that lens, and that does leave a lot of,
No, it leaves a lot
peripheral
of
vision,
stuff that could be missed
for
in
sure.
my experience. So I would
Yeah,
say
for sure.
someone that would have a philosophy more of, hey, whatever works for you, I'm going to be willing to work with you and your specific scenario. I'm not going to try to take you into my thinking 100% if it doesn't fit. Right.
Right,
And there are people who do that, though, where they'll think it has to be this way
right.
because I'm not going to help you if you think it's this way. So
Yeah.
it's just something to caution against. And I've seen people think that way with like prescription medications, or
Mhm.
in this case with attachment theory. It's just something to watch out for
Yeah,
amongst like therapists and whatever.
yeah, I agree.
So any other closing thoughts that you have on your own situation,
Um,
where you are with the journey now, perhaps?
gosh, yeah, I think right now I'm still, I think healing is sort of a lifelong commitment,
Sure.
always checking in with ourselves, making sure that we're we're clear, and that we're being honest with ourselves about how we are in the world. And I think the next phase is just keep doing it, like you said, be consistent and I don't think that I think I'm going to keep doing the things that I've found that are working for me, and working with my therapist, and doing emotional healing, emotional release,
Right.
somatic work, emotion code, just making sure that those emotions have a place to be, and that they're all welcomed, and that I talk about those things with my daughters. How are you feeling? How does it, all the feelings are welcome here. All of
Well,
the
one thing you're making me think of here too is, say you have a romantic relationship again once, like someday, still keeping the parts of your routine you're doing now instead of like
Mm,
abandoning your whole self-care routine. I think that
yeah,
is something that happens a lot too. They'll
yeah,
meet somebody, and then all of the things that helped them be that person that that other person's attracted to,
mm,
all of a sudden they'll abandon. Oh, I did this hobby
yeah,
before. Nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go to the
that's
gym as
true.
much. I'm not going to read. I'm not going to take my baths. I'm not going to
That's
go take my,
right.
and they
That's
abandon all of the things that was working. So I
Yeah.
think it's important that when you meet someone new at some point, and this goes for everyone, not just people who have
Sure.
been in relationships with narcissists, but you keep the things that are working for you too. You
That's
don't
right.
just drop everything at the drop of a hat for somebody else. And I think that helps people to stay grounded and less likely to be swept away by the good feelings someone else may bring.
Yes. Yeah. I think I'm no longer interested in that feeling. I know what that feels like, and I'm much more interested in, um, experiences with people that don't involve this kind of whirlwind, I'm losing myself feeling.
Right.
Um, so I'm glad I have an awareness about that. And so I'm just going to continue to work on, myself, and moving forward, and working with my patients, and finding a way to be authentically myself, um, in the world. I think that's the kind of the best that we can hope for, any of us, is
Right.
that we have the freedom to be who we really are at our core, and treat ourselves with a lot of love, and then be able to share that with each other.
And it sounds like what you're talking about is a mature love, like not
I
just like a
hope so.
childlike love, but
I've never done that before, so I don't know, Jared.
I
That's
think
to be
a
totally
minority of people have done it.
I
So
haven't experienced that. Yeah, so, maybe someday, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe,
right.
maybe.
So we didn't get into this part, but perhaps you are in California. Are you comfortable with sharing where you are in California, like where your
Oh,
practice is?
I'm in San Diego. I'm in San Diego, California. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
if someone needs acupuncture in the area, check
Oh,
her
yeah.
out for one. And she
Sure,
understands this topic too. So maybe if
sure.
you've had an
Mhm.
experience similar, another reason to check her out where you can talk to her about this kind of stuff too.
Sure. Yeah, that's right, we can.
All right, Dr. Gretchen. Dr. Gretchen Seitz,
Mhm.
it's been a pleasure having you on here today. And
Likewise, it's been a
it was a
pleasure.
pleasure hearing your story too.
Thank you, I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope it helps just ease somebody's pain a little bit.
I'm sure it will. I mean, it got me thinking about some things too.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
It's been a
Have a
pleasure.
great rest of your day.
You too.